Thank you, Judge. Please state your full name,
Jennifer Lee Shaw,
and what is your maiden name?
Reeves.
And how are you related to Curtis Reeves, if you are?
I am related. He is my father.
And how old are you?
40.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I do. I have one brother, Matthew, who is 3 years younger than me.
And before I ask you a little bit about Matthew, let me ask you what you do for a living.
I am the Vice President of Human Resources for a community bank.
And do you have any children?
I do. I have one daughter, Madison. She just turned 2 on Sunday.
Okay. And then you told us that you have a brother named Matthew, right?
Yes, sir.
And what does Matthew do for a living?
Matthew is a police officer with the Tampa Police Department.
And what's your mother's name?
Vivian Reeves.
How old is she?
My mom is 67.
And is your mother and your father still married?
Yes, they are. They've been married for 46 years.
Now, you have other relatives in the area?
Yes, sir, I do. My grandmother, who is my father's mother, lives in Tampa. She just turned 93 on Sunday. My dad has one brother and 3 sisters. His brother lives in Oklahoma, but all 3 of his sisters live in this area. One sister lives in Hudson, one lives in the Sanford, Orlando area, and her son also lives in the Sanford, Orlando area, and then my Aunt Margaret lives in Tampa. I have my aunt and uncle who live in, I think their address is Land O'Lakes. My 2 cousins, Holly and Tommy, are their children, and their children also live here as well. Holly has 2 children, Laura and Tyler, and both of them and their spouses live in the Land O'Lakes, Lutz area. And my cousin Tom has 3 daughters who still live at home.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Did I cut you off? Are there more?
No, sir. I think that's all I can think of right now.
Okay. And is your family, would you describe it as a close-knit family? In other words, do you see these family members that you described?
Yes, sir, all of them.
Okay. And do you have family get-togethers?
Yes, sir. We have family get-togethers throughout the year. Obviously, the holidays are the obvious times of the year we get together with all of them. And actually, the family members that I talked about are 2 sides of the family. Some of those are my mom's side, and some of those are my dad's. But we actually, just because we are a close family, we all get together lots of times, both sides of the family. Birthdays, holidays. We're getting ready to have a joint birthday with my daughter Madison and all her cousins and both sides of the family next weekend.
Okay. And how old is Madison?
Madison is 2.
Now, you live where, in what town right now?
I live in Brooksville.
And who do you live with?
I live with my mother and father.
Okay. And there's some circumstances, and we'll talk a little bit about how you got to live there. But have you lived in the, for lack of a better terminology, the Tampa Bay area your entire life?
Yes, sir.
And what about your brother? Where does he live?
He lives in, his address is Dade City.
Okay. And has he also lived in this area his entire life?
Yes, sir, except for when he was in the military for 6 years and kind of traveled around with them. So for that 6-year period, he did not live here in this area, but prior to that and after that, yes, sir, he has.
Okay. Now, the house you live in Brooksville, whose house is that?
That is my parents' home, Curtis and Vivian Reeves.
How long have they lived there?
They've lived there since, I think, about 2005.
Okay. And did they build that house?
Yes, sir, they did.
And did they build that house as part of their retirement plan?
I believe so. Prior to that, they had lived in the same house since before I was born in Lutz. And then my brother had moved to Dade City. I had gotten married and moved to the Spring Hill area, so we were both north. And I think, yes, as part of their retirement, they just decided to kind of move closer to their kids and still build a newer home that didn't have all the issues that a 30 or 35-year-old home had.
Okay, and that new home they built a little tiny home for 2 retired people to live in?
No, sir, they didn't. I think their house is about 2,500 square feet on about an acre of land. They built that house for, I know, in hopes of grandkids, which finally came along, and they also built it to be able to entertain and have family over, friends over.
Now, you said you grew up in Lutz?
Yes, sir.
And tell me about that upbringing. Well, before we talk about that, let's talk a little bit about your father's history, okay?
Okay.
Do you know where he was born?
He was born in Jacksonville.
And when did he move to Tampa?
I believe that he was still either an infant or a toddler when his family, his mother and father, relocated to Tampa. My grandfather was a truck driver.
And so he spent his entire life in the Tampa area, is that
Yes,
correct?
sir.
He was in the service, is that right?
Yes, sir. He was in the Navy for several years, and then in the reserves after that.
And do you know what he did in the Navy?
I don't know the technical title for it, but I know that he was on submarines.
And then once he got back to Tampa, do you know what sort of job or what sort of work he got?
I think he worked a couple of odd jobs, maybe a salesman at one point in time, and then he went to work for the Tampa Electric Company and was a lineman for them.
And how long did he do that for?
I'm not really certain. I don't think it was for very long because he went on with the police department, I think, in '66.
Okay. So when you were born, he was already, these are bad math skills, but when you were born, he was already with the Tampa Police Department.
Yes, sir.
And so you remember him growing up always as a police officer, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, you know your father went to college while he was in the police department, right?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And do you know where he went?
He went to the, I'm not sure if he went anywhere for undergraduate, but I know he ultimately graduated magna cum laude from University of Tampa, and that was in 1976.
Okay. And he did that while he was a police officer?
Sure. While he was a police officer, he had a toddler and one on the way.
And was your mother working at the time?
I believe that she was. I'm not completely certain of that.
But throughout her life, she has worked?
Yes, sir.
What sort of work did she do?
For the majority that I can remember of our childhood, my mother was a secretary at a construction company. She also went back to school after Dad did and got her teaching degree, and then she taught elementary school for several years. And then she decided that wasn't the career for her, so she, I think she went directly from there to USAA Insurance.
Okay. Now, your father rose through the ranks in the police department. You remember that as a child, right?
Yes, sir.
And he graduated magna cum laude from college.
Yes, sir.
So was this a father that you never saw around the house?
No, sir.
Okay, tell me about your childhood then in terms of your father being present.
My father was present at everything. I don't know. My parents seemed to realize that investing time in your family was the most important thing. Either they realized that or they didn't have the money to not realize that. Because what we did as a family is we camped every year. We bicycled, we hiked, we fished. We did all kinds of mainly outdoor activities that we liked to do. But my dad was always present at every activity. We went to church together every Sunday. Some Sunday nights, some Wednesday nights. But no, I can't remember a time where my dad wasn't present for an event my brother or I had or involved in our school activities or anything like that.
So when you were a child, you attended church regularly?
Yes, sir, we did.
And your father and mother were also involved in that, right?
Yes, sir.
And what church was that you attended?
That was First Baptist Church of Lutz. My parents had gone there when they originally moved to Lutz, which was prior to me being born, and they were active in church in that. Prior to them having me in '73, my dad was active with the youth group at church, planning like their social activities, volleyball, basketball, all of those kinds of things. And then that's the only church that I can remember going to up until adulthood. So.
Okay. Now, I mean, like all children, sometimes children do something that doesn't necessarily please their parents. So, is it fair to say that you were, punished or disciplined as a child?
Yes, it is.
And let me ask you, were you also spanked?
Yes, I was.
Were you ever spanked in anger?
No.
By your father?
No, it was quite the opposite, which seemed like more of a punishment than anything else because I don't know if it was a cooling off period for him or for us, but when we did get in trouble, it was go think about what you did, and then if you were going to get spanked or grounded or what have you, we had to discuss it before and admit what we did, and I don't know was not an acceptable answer.
Okay, let me ask you this. I learned how to cuss by driving around with my dad. When you drove around as a child in the car, did you hear your father react in an angry way to people that may have cut him off or any of those sort of things?
No, sir, not that I can remember. We actually, I think I might have been, we traveled back and forth to North Carolina, and I remember one time he had a Ford Explorer, and he had like a rack on the back of it that he put action packer boxes on, and that's what we used to take, since we always had the truck loaded down, we took stuff back and forth from Florida, and I remember somebody rear-ended us somewhere in North Carolina, and it bent that rack on the back. I don't think there was anything on it, but I remember them resolving it amicably. They didn't even call the police. They didn't get insurance involved, and there was kind of a non-incident. Dad told the guy, I think I can bend it back.
Okay. So obviously this was something that your father cared about in terms of that rack on the back of the truck, but your testimony is that he didn't react angrily to the person that wrongfully crashed into the back of him, right?
Correct.
Can you think of any time during your childhood where you saw your father interact in an angry manner with a neighbor, somebody at the store, somebody else in the car at all?
No, sir, I can't.
Now, you live with your parents now, right?
Yes, sir.
And how long have you lived there?
I've lived there since the end of April 2013, so the end of April last year.
Okay, and you're married?
I am currently married, but I'm in the process of going through a divorce. My husband and I are separated, and that's why I moved in with my parents.
All right. And you have your daughter, is it Madison?
Yes, sir.
Part of the time you share with the child's father, correct?
That is correct.
And so the child and you are living there with your father and mother, right?
Yes, sir.
In Brooksville?
Yes, sir.
Now, when you told your father that your husband was seeking a divorce, what was his reaction? What was his demeanor, his temperament?
When my husband told me that he didn't want to be married to me anymore, the first person I called was my dad. I kind of expected him to try to take charge of the situation and kind of help me through it that way. But he didn't. He said, "We love you. Do you want me to come over?" He asked me if there was anything that him and Mom could do for me. And he told me to remember to slow down in your decision-making process and make sure that you consider yourself and Madison and that you make smart decisions.
And throughout your childhood and your life and up to now, has your father been a man that has always honored his commitments?
Yes, sir. He was big on us being responsible and following through on your obligations.
Now, let's talk a little bit. You mentioned North Carolina. Your parents don't own that home or property anymore, is that correct?
No, sir. They sold it several years back.
And so the only home they own right now, is that the Brooksville
Yes, sir.
home where you live?
Yes, sir.
Because the Lutz home was sold previously as well.
That's correct.
You mentioned you have a grandmother who's, you said 93?
Yes, sir.
She just had a birthday, right?
On Sunday.
And so that is your father's mother.
Yes, sir.
And is she in assisted living, or is she living in her own place still?
She lives in a retirement community where it's a trailer park, but it's a retirement community, and she does live alone.
Okay. And what does your father do to look after her or care for her?
Because she insists on living alone, my mom and dad go there several times a week. They take food, do odds and ends around the house for her. I know dad trims her shrubbery. Mom helps out in the house. They may cook her dinner. They always bring her food and that kind of stuff, but usually they go a couple of times a week.
Okay. Now, growing up, you remember your father, was he a physically fit kind of a guy?
Yes, sir, he was.
Okay, and why do you say that?
I know that the police department required him to be in shape. The tactical response team required him to be in shape. He was never the weightlifter, big muscle dude, but he was always physically fit. He ran all the time to kind of keep his weight down and to stay in shape, and the cardio piece. So.
Okay. Now, before we talk about some of your observations of maybe what he's like now and some of his physical limitations and maladies, let's talk about your mother a little bit. You said your mother is 67?
Yes, sir.
And she has some medical issues, does she not?
Yes, sir, she does.
Okay, and what are those?
My mom has osteoarthritis. I believe that she also has some bone loss as far as bone density is concerned. She also has a nodule in one of her lungs. She goes to Moffitt Cancer Center every 6 months and has that looked at. The last time she went, not only did they still see the nodule, but they found another spot in her lung. She just went again last week, and the original nodule has not grown at all, and the other one has gone away. So that's a huge answer to prayer. Mom also has asthma and chronic bronchitis, and through going through all kinds of testing on her lungs, she only has about 60% lung capacity.
Now, does your father do anything to help your mother deal with these problems that she's having now, these physical ailments?
Yes, sir. The doctors have told my mom that there is a possibility that she may have to have surgery in the future, and that she needs to stay physically fit. She needs to walk. She needs to stay healthy, and that she needs to do all of those things in anticipation of, if they have to do surgery, that she recovers quicker.
And your father likes to bicycle, right?
Yes, sir.
And did he buy a special non-fast road bicycle so that he could ride around with your mom?
Yes, he did.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about your father's physical ailments. What do you know in terms of the physical maladies that your father suffers?
My dad kind of had the belief, I remember him talking over the years about how some of the people that retired from the police department, or people that retired, they just kind of got stagnant and didn't stay active. So Dad was determined that he was going to slow down the aging process, I guess, by staying active. But he has bursitis in his shoulder. I know he has arthritis in his hands. He struggled with his sciatic nerve for the better part of my childhood. I don't know if that's something that still bothers him now. I do know he has a bad back. He also has floaters in his eyes. So I guess the doctor has prescribed special drops to keep his eyes moisturized and that kind of thing.
So you know that in the past he's had problems with vision, where he would actually have what you describe as floaters, which are objects appearing to move along the eye, correct?
That's correct.
All right.
I think it kind of obstructs the vision when it moves in a certain area.
Okay. And what else?
He has high blood pressure that he takes medication for. He has high cholesterol that he takes medication for. I think that his doctor, he's gone to the same doctor for as long as I can remember, and his doctor has prescribed him to take an aspirin every day for his heart. I think Dr. Yetzi has even told him that he feels that it's a combination of the medication as well as the physical activity that Dad tries to be involved in that really helps him to regulate a lot of what he's having to deal with.
Does he also have a sleep-related illness?
Yes, sir, he does. He's gone to the sleep clinic where you stay overnight, and they have you all hooked up to the monitors and everything, and they've determined that when he sleeps at night, the oxygen in his blood is very low, so he does use a CPAP machine to sleep with.
Okay. Now, let's talk about some of the things that you've observed, because you've been living at the house for a little while, about your dad on a day-to-day basis, okay? First of all, before I get there, let's talk about your daughter. Is that the only grandchild?
Yes, sir, it is.
And when your daughter was born, your parents were already retired, right?
Yes, sir.
Had been retired for a while.
Yes.
And so is it fair to say that their plans in retirement was sort of to travel? In fact, they have traveled a little bit.
They have traveled a little bit. Their plans were to travel, and when Madison was born, they actually had planned to go out west. But I had struggled with fertility issues, so the timing of that just didn't coincide with their trip.
So once your child was born, did they just go off on the trip? Tell me what happened.
No, sir. When Madison was born, I never thought that I would be able to have kids. And so my brothers never married. And so I guess they thought they were never going to be able to have grandchildren. And it was quite the blessing when my daughter was born and she was healthy. It was a very emotional time for my whole family, for my mom, my dad, and of course myself and my husband. I enjoy working. I always knew that I would go back to work. I already had a daycare center picked out prior to Madison being born. And my parents were planning a trip out west, but my dad came to my mom, and it's not even something that we had discussed. And he said, I think that when Jennifer goes back to work, I want to keep the baby for a while. So I was able to stay home from work for 3 months with Madison, and then my parents kept her for 6 months after that before she went into daycare.
Okay. Because they wanted to see the baby grow, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Now, when we're talking about Madison, we're talking about your baby, does your father play with Madison?
Yes, sir, he does.
And tell the court what kind of observations you made about any kind of physical problems your father had while he was playing with Madison.
Well, I mean, as far as picking her up, so you can sometimes tell if I think at Monday's appointment she weighed like 26.5 pounds, but as far as picking her up and things like that, sometimes Dad, you can see him favor one or the other shoulder when he picks her up. He will push her in her swing in the backyard. She likes for people to get on the floor and play with her, and she'll always say, sit, Papa, or sit, Grandma, or, to sit on the floor with her. And he's just really not able to do that. When he does get down there, it's not easy getting up. Occasionally, we'll walk around the neighborhood together, all four of us, because one of the activities that he involves Mom in is getting her to walk around the neighborhood all the time. And we'll walk around the neighborhood, and I have a dog, and we'll take my dog, and we'll take Madison in her wagon, too. And so sometimes Dad and I take turns pulling Madison around the neighborhood.
Okay. Now, your father likes to woodwork, or he did in the past, correct?
Yes, sir.
Does he still do a lot of that?
No, sir, he didn't. He doesn't do very little. I think he made something really simple recently, like a ladder ball stand. It was just something he bolted together and stained. But as far as the woodworking he used to make tables and benches and just all kinds of things. He kept all of his tools because he just knew that his hands would get better and he'd be able to do it again. But it hasn't happened.
Okay. Now, you know that he likes to hunt with your brother, and they had a hunt they were going to use some bow and arrows to go hunting. Is that right?
Yes, sir. They had an archery hunt, and it was 3 weeks ago.
Tell me what you know about your father's ability to actually use the bow.
I didn't really know this at the time because I work, but I knew that Dad has some targets set up in the backyard, and he practices his archery was practicing every day. He would go out and he would shoot a couple of arrows and then come back in, and then he may go out several times a day to just to shoot a couple of arrows and then come back in the house. What I didn't know at the time is that he was having trouble pulling his bow back, but him and my brother had planned this trip way in advance. We knew he was looking forward to spending the week with Matt. He was looking forward to being out in the woods. He wasn't sure he would be able to pull the bow back, and it's my understanding after he came back from his trip, my mom told me while he was gone that he got to the point where he couldn't pull it back at all, so that he went and got a massage to try to kind of loosen up his shoulder and see if he could do that. And then when he was on the hunt, he said he backed the pressure down on his bow in hopes of being able to hunt, but he wasn't even sure that he'd be able to pull it back even if something came into range.
Have you seen him have difficulties putting together a kayak paddle, for instance, lately?
Yes, sir. We go. That's one of the family activities that we do. Is between them and my brother, they have 4 kayaks, and the 4 of us will go kayaking. And there's been several occasions where my dad has asked me to help him pull the paddles apart when we're done,
Okay.
just because he doesn't have the strength in his hands.
Now, we know that your father and mother own a home in Brooksville, right?
Yes, sir.
Do they own property anywhere else
No, sir.
in the United States
No, sir.
or anywhere else in the world?
No, sir.
And let's just talk a little bit about a financial issue. If the court were to grant some kind of pretrial release, have you identified some funds that would be used to pay for bail or to try to contact a bondsman for a premium?
Yes, sir. We have.
Okay. And so what have you identified?
My parents own their home free and clear, but
And how much is that worth by the property appraiser's website?
The tax records from last year indicated it was worth about $186,000.
Okay. And what else? Do they have any cash available?
They have a $30,000 home equity line of credit on that house. It doesn't have a balance on it though, and then they have between their checking, savings, between their savings account, they have $22,000.
Okay, and so that would be the money that would be earmarked to, if the court were to grant pretrial release, to try to secure a bond for your father.
Yes, sir.
Now, you've known your father from the beginning, and you live with him now again, both as a child and as an adult. Have you seen any changes in his temperament?
No, sir.
Is there anything that you have noticed that you could tell the court would be an indication that he no longer wants to honor his commitments as he always has?
No, sir.
In your opinion, is there anything that your father has done or said either 40 years ago or today that would make him a danger to this community or any community?
No, sir, not at all.
If the court were to grant your father a pretrial release, is there any doubt in your mind that your father would show up for court each and every time that the court required him to be here?
No doubt at all.
Can I have one moment, Judge?
Of course.
Mr. Escobar reminded me there were 2 issues that I didn't discuss with you regarding the home. The home you live in now belongs to your mother and father.
Correct.
And so your father had guns in the home at one point.
Yes, sir.
And so now, what is that situation? Are there any guns in the home?
No, sir, there are not. We actually removed any guns that were in the home as well as the ammunition the day after the incident.
Okay. And you also had your own personal firearm.
Yes, sir, I did.
That's no longer in the home.
No, sir, it's not.
Your father, he has a passport, right?
Yes, sir, he does.
And you have that with you today, prepared if the court were to ask for it, to turn in his passport,
Yes,
correct?
I do.
One other thing, let me ask you, as you look out in the audience, do you recognize any of these people?
A lot of them.
Okay. How many people do you think are here on your father's behalf this morning, or this afternoon, I should say?
I don't know number-wise, but pretty much split it down the middle, and the whole side is here for my dad.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have anything else.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Ma'am, do you have the passport on you right now?
Yes, sir, I do.
You do? Okay. You may inquire, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. Mr. Escobar, Mr. Marcus. Mrs. Shaw, good afternoon. ma'am.
Hi.
Have you ever been to the movies with your father?
Yes, I have.
And have you known your father to carry a firearm on his person?
Yes.
And have you been to the Cobb Theater with your father?
That's the one in the Wesley Chapel?
Yes, ma'am.
I believe that we have.
Okay. And did your father carry a firearm in that movie theater on the occasion that you and he went to the movies?
I'm not certain.
Is it fair to say that he carries that .380 Kel-Tec on him at all times when he's out and about?
I don't think so, because I think he has a .22 that he carried quite a bit as well. And It's not some. I mean, it's something like we kind of grew up with. It's not something that we ever talked about. Are you carrying today? Or are you not carrying today? He had a concealed weapons license, and I kind of assumed that he pretty much always had a firearm on him.
Okay, so it's fair to say that your assumption of him was that he always carried a firearm, be it the 380 Kel-Tec or a .22 revolver.
I wouldn't know the type of gun, but I would say yes to the first part of that question.
And in fact, since you've indicated that you've been to the cop theater, are you aware of the fact there's a sign before you go into the theater that indicates no firearms or knives?
I am now that this incident has happened. I don't know that I ever paid attention to it prior.
Judge, may I have this mark for identification? Sure.
It's part of the policy.
Mr. Escobar, I'm gonna ask at some point to see his passport. You mind if I look at it now while we're
Have no
doing
problems
this?
with that.
State, do you have any objection to looking at the passport?
No, sir.
It's the actual pass part, and then there's a card in there as well.
See a couple of
Okay.
I would ask the record to reflect on showing what's been marked as States Exhibits F and G to Mr. Escobar and Mr. Lopez. May I approach the witness, Judge?
You may.
So I'm handing you what's been marked as States Exhibits F and G for identification purposes. I'm going to ask that you take a look at these photographs and see if, when you went to the cop theater, that you recall seeing that sign there.
Not that I've ever thought of it. I don't recall ever seeing that.
Thank you, Mayor. You do indicate that your father always carried a firearm on his person, though, correct?
I can't say every single time that he's always done that, but I kind of assumed growing up that he pretty much did.
Okay. Now, are you pretty knowledgeable about the assets that your father has and if he's on any deeds, so on and so forth?
I think that he might be on my grandmother's trailer.
Right.
I believe that he might be on her trailer, but I think that that's the only thing.
Do you know the value of that trailer or that property?
I wouldn't say it has much of a value. I couldn't even guesstimate.
Were you aware of your father having some liquid assets, cash, and that the money was placed in Linda's name? Who is Linda? How is Linda related to your father?
He has a sister named Linda.
Okay. Are you aware of any transactions going on back and forth since this occurred, that money was transferred to Linda's name?
I don't think money, well, my father never, that was never my father's money. That was my grandmother's money, and I believe it came from my grandfather's life insurance. My dad being the oldest child, I think my grandmother had the money in both her and dad's name. So I think that they might be in the process of retitling that.
How much money are we talking about?
I'm not really sure. I think it was in CDs, but I don't know the amount because it's not his asset.
You indicated that all of the firearms have been removed from the residence.
Yes, sir.
Where are the firearms at now?
My brother was the one that actually removed them from the house, and he has them locked up.
So you would agree with me that nothing would prevent your father from getting his hands on those firearms if he wanted to?
No, sir, he wouldn't. He would not get.
Are you agreeing with me, or there's nothing to prevent your father from telling his son, "I want my firearms back"? Should he be granted a bail or release?
No, he would not get his hands on the firearms for his own integrity and for my brother's integrity.
Where are the firearms that, you indicated that your brother had them, where?
My brother removed them from the house, and I know that he has locked them in someone's safe. I'm not certain if they're together, because I know that he removed firearms and he removed ammunition, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not quite certain the answer to that question.
Okay. Do you know if it was rifles, was it handguns, revolvers, pistols?
I think there was both.
Okay. You have a moment, Judge?
You may.
Judge, I have no further questions of Mr. Shaw.
I'm going to return the passport to Mrs. Shaw.
Thank you.
Do you have any further questions?
No,
Mr.
sir.
Myers? Ms. Shaw, before you're excused as a witness, I looked at the passport. It appears it was issued in 2010. Is that correct?
Can I look at it?
That's okay.